At 2:17 a.m., a message popped up on my phone. If you are still outside my apartment, please don't knock on the door, because I never gave you my address. The problem was, I was standing right in front of her apartment door at that exact moment. Hello, friends. Welcome to today's episode of True Horror Vault. In today's episode, we will hear 3 real-life inspired online dating incidents where the decision to meet a stranger turned into a terrifying nightmare within seconds. These stories are reconstructed based on real-world online dating dangers. There are no ghosts here, no supernatural entities, just human beings whose true intentions are hidden behind a screen. So, if you use Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, or any other dating app, listen very closely to today's stories. Because sometimes, the person you've been talking to all night might not be the person you saw in the pictures. Let's begin our first story. My name is Ryan. This happened a few years ago when I was living in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I was 28 at the time. I didn't use dating apps very much, but one Friday night, I opened Bumble and matched with a girl. Her name was Emily. She had 3 or 4 pictures on her profile. One in front of a mountain, one in a coffee shop, and another with a dog. Her profile looked completely normal. We started chatting. Emily was fun to talk to. She didn't ask weird questions or overshare personal details. We talked for about a week. Then one night, she said, "If you want, you can come over to my place this Friday and watch a movie." I hesitated for a moment because this would be our very first meeting. I replied, "How about we meet at a coffee shop first?" She messaged back, "I really don't like crowded places. We can meet outside briefly first, and then you can decide." In the end, we agreed to meet at a small restaurant on Friday evening. When I saw Emily there, my first wave of unease hit me, because she didn't look like the girl in the photos. Same hair type, same facial structure, but she looked at least 10 years older. I thought maybe the photos were just old. However, she acted completely normal. We talked for about an hour. Then she said, "My apartment is only 5 minutes from here. We can grab a drink and head over." I know it sounds like a normal offer, but looking back now, I should have walked away right then and there. Still, I went. Her apartment was inside an old 3-story building. The first thing I noticed after stepping inside was there was no directory or resident list in the lobby. Emily led me up the stairs. On the 2nd floor, she stopped in front of a door. Then she suddenly said, "Wait a minute." She unlocked the door and stepped inside. I stood outside in the hallway. About 30 seconds later, she stepped back out and said, "Come in." I walked inside. The apartment was strangely empty. No family photos, no books, no TV, just a sofa, a small table, and a floor lamp. I asked, "Do you live here alone?" She smiled. "Yes." We sat on the sofa. A few minutes later, Emily walked toward the kitchen. Right then, I heard a sound. Someone was walking on the floor above us. I raised my head and looked at the ceiling. Emily walked back in. I asked, "Is someone stay on the floor above you?" She paused for a second and said, "No." I asked again, "Then what was that sound?" Looking somewhat annoyed, she replied, "It's an old building. It makes noises like that sometimes." I didn't press further, but a few minutes later, the sound came again, much clearer this time. Someone was walking slowly, from one end of the room to the other. Emily wasn't looking at me anymore. She was busy doing something on her phone. I said, "I think I should get going." She instantly replied, "So soon?" I stood up. Right at that second, a notification popped up on my phone. I pulled out my phone and saw a message from the Bumble app, from Emily's profile. "Where are you?" I stared at my screen in disbelief for a few seconds, because Emily was standing right in front of me. I slowly looked up at her. She was staring at my phone. I said, "Did you just message me?" She said, "No." Then she reached out, wanted to see my phone. I didn't hand it to her. The very next second, her phone rang. She glanced at her screen, and her expression went completely cold and blank. I asked, "Is everything okay?" She said, "I have something to take care of. You can leave now." The shift in her tone was so abrupt that I didn't ask any questions. I walked toward the door. Right then, another sound came from the floor above. Then came the sound of a door slamming shut. I looked at Emily. Her face had turned pale white. I opened the door and hurried out. As I ran down the stairs, I felt like someone was watching me from above. I made it out of the building and reached the parking lot. The moment I got into my car, I opened Bumble. Emily's profile was gone. I searched her name. Nothing came up. Then I started searching for the building's address online. After about 10 minutes, I found an old rental listing featuring photos of that exact apartment. But one detail in the listing was completely wrong. The apartment in the photos was not on the second floor. The unit numbers shown in the pictures belonged to the third floor. I realized right then that the door I had walked through wasn't even a valid apartment unit in that building. The next morning, I reported the incident to the police. They told me that similar online dating complaints had been reported from that building before. They never found Emily. And the most disturbing part? When the photos from the Bumble account I talked to were reverse image searched, they turned out to belong to another woman's social media account, which meant I had never been talking to anyone named Emily. To this day, I don't know who was actually inside that apartment that night, and I never got an explanation for the footsteps on the floor above me. But one thing I know for certain, no matter how nicely you talk to someone online, you can never truly be sure who is standing behind the screen. So, friends, you just heard the first story. The most terrifying part about Ryan's situation was that the danger didn't come from a dark alley. It came from someone he had been casually chatting with for days. However, in our next story, things get even worse, because a woman had no idea that her first date already knew far too much about her life before they even met. Let's move on to story 2. My name is Chloe. This happened in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was 27 at the time and had been using Hinge for about 2 months. One night, I matched with a guy named Mark. His profile was very ordinary. One picture in front of an office, one on a hiking trail, and another sitting at a coffee shop. His bio read, *, looking for something real. *, we started chatting that very night. Mark was polite. He asked about my job, what movies I liked, and where I enjoyed traveling. I didn't share anything overly personal. Within a few days, we were talking regularly. One night, he asked me, "Do you still live in that same old apartment?" I froze, because I had never told him where I lived. I typed back, "How did you know where I live?" There was no response for a while. Then he wrote, "You told me earlier." I knew for a fact I hadn't. I tried not to overthink it, assuming I might have accidentally dropped a hint in conversation. 2 days later, Mark asked me out on a date. We agreed to meet on Friday night at a busy restaurant. I deliberately chose a crowded place. Mark arrived on time. In person, he looked just like his photos. We talked for about an hour, and everything seemed normal. Then, in the middle of dinner, he suddenly asked, "Is your sister's name Megan?" My hand stopped midair. I said, "Yes." He chuckled and said, "Just guess." I stopped smiling, because I had never mentioned my sister's name on Hinge. I asked, "How did you know that?" He said, "Social media." I realized right then that he had done some digging on me. Maybe that wasn't a huge red flag on its own. People often look up their dates beforehand. The problem was, Mark knew things that were nowhere on any of my public social media accounts. He knew which gym I went to. He knew I usually call my mom on Thursday nights. He even said, "You usually go for a walk with coffee on Friday mornings, right?" I went dead silent. I really did go for Friday morning walks with coffee, but I had never posted about it anywhere. I decided to end the date right then and there. I said, "I think I'm going to call it a night." Mark stared at me for a few seconds. Then he asked calmly, "Are you scared of me?" I said, "No, I'm just tired." He smiled and said, "All right." I left the restaurant and walked straight to my car. I drove toward home. About 10 minutes later, a message popped up on my phone. It was Mark. *, why are you taking a different route home tonight? *, a cold wave of dread washed over me. I didn't pull over. Instead, I rerouted toward a nearby police station. Before I could get there, another message came through. Asterisk, if you want, I can stop following you. Asterisk. I glanced at my rearview mirror. In the distance, I saw a black SUV. I wasn't sure if it was his car, but I pulled into the police station anyway. I went inside and explained everything. The police reviewed the messages on my phone and advised me not to go home alone for the night. An officer walked out to check the area around my car. I thought Mark was gone, but about 20 minutes later, the officer returned and asked, "Have you seen that guy around before?" I said, "No." He said, "That same black SUV has been captured on your apartment complex's parking cameras over the past few days." I sat there speechless. Then the officer showed me a photo taken from the camera footage. A black SUV with a man sitting in the driver's seat. It was Mark. I stayed at my mother's house that night. The next morning, I logged into Hinge and saw that Mark's profile was gone. I blocked his number. About a week later, a message came from an unknown number. Asterisk, are you still at your mom's house? Asterisk. I froze with the phone in my hand because I hadn't told anyone I was staying at my mom's. I had even asked the police to keep that detail private. I handed the number over to the police immediately. They later discovered the message was sent using a disposable messaging service. Mark was never found. A few months later, I received an email link to my old Hinge account regarding security login history. There was a terrifying detail. Multiple login attempts had been made on my account from an unknown device over a long period. That's when it hit me. The problem wasn't just that Mark had searched for information about me. He had been monitoring my entire online life long before we ever matched. And the most chilling part? Even today, whenever I see someone on a dating app, my first thought is an asterisk. Is this person nice? Asterisk. I ask myself, asterisk, how much does this person already know about me? Asterisk. Friends, the second story reminds us of a terrifying truth. Just because someone speaks politely online doesn't mean they are safe. Your name, photos, job, family, and daily routines, when pieced together, a stranger can uncover details about your life that you never explicitly told them. And our third story is even more unsettling because a man realized that the girl he thought he was meeting for a date didn't actually exist at all. My name is Daniel. This happened in Phoenix, Arizona. I was 30 at the time and going through a rough patch in life. On a friend's advice, I created an account on Hinge. That's where I met a girl named Ashley. Her profile didn't raise any suspicions at first. The photos were simple. One smiling at a restaurant, one standing on a hiking trail, and another in a black jacket standing next to a car. After matching, we talked for about 2 weeks. Ashley wasn't overly chatty. However, she messaged me almost every night at the exact same time, between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. She would ask, "How was your day?" I would talk about work, and she would share snippets of her day too. She mentioned she lived in a small apartment on the north side of Phoenix. One day I asked, "Do you want to talk on the phone?" She replied, "I'm a bit shy, maybe in a few days." I respected that. After 2 weeks, I suggested, "Can we meet up this Friday?" There was a long pause before she replied, "Okay." She sent me an address in a residential neighborhood outside Phoenix, claiming it was her friend's house. I asked, "So you're not at your apartment?" She replied, "Not this week." On Friday night, I drove over. The neighborhood was eerie and quiet. Very few cars were on the street, and most houses had their lights off. I parked my car and messaged Ashley, "I'm here." A few seconds later, she replied, "Asterisk, come into the back door." Asterisk. I paused. I typed back, "Should I come to the front door?" She replied, asterisk, "No, the back door is unlocked." Asterisk. I looked around. Trying not to overthink it, I walked around the back of the house. The back door was indeed unlocked. I stepped inside. It was pitch dark. I called out, "Ashley?" No response. I turned on my phone's flashlight and looked around. The house was completely abandoned. An old sofa, a broken table, and a few empty boxes on the floor. No signs of anyone actually living there. I immediately dialed Ashley's number. The call went through, but nobody answered. I called again. This time her phone was switched off. Right then, a message popped up on my screen. "Are you inside?" I typed, "Yes. Where are you?" 3 seconds later came the reply. "Go to the basement." A cold shiver ran straight down my spine. I wanted to leave immediately, but right at that moment, I heard a noise from above. Someone was walking. I turned toward the back door, but then heard the front door slam shut. I ran back toward the rear exit and tried the handle. The door was locked from the outside. I jiggled the handle frantically, but it wouldn't budge. I messaged Ashley again, who locked the door. Her reply came in 3 seconds. Asterisk, not me. Asterisk. Then came another message. Asterisk, are you alone? Asterisk. That was when I knew someone was playing a sick game with me. I pulled up my dial pad to call 911. Before I could press call, a male voice echoed from upstairs. "Daniel." He called my name. I experienced true, paralyzing terror for the first time in my life, because no one in that house was supposed to know my name except Ashley. I sprinted toward the kitchen and found a small window. I smashed the glass with my bare hands to break out. My hands were bleeding, but I didn't care. I squeezed through the window and tumbled onto the ground outside. I ran frantically toward the main road. A few minutes later, a passing car pulled over, and the driver called 911 for me. Police arrived and surrounded the house. They searched the entire property but found no one inside. However, in the basement, they found several items that prompted an officer to ask me, "Have you ever been here before?" I said, "No." In the basement were several old burner phones, a laptop, and printed photos of various people. Some photos showed people in their cars. Others showed people standing in front of their homes. And in one of those photos was me, standing right next to my car. I had no idea when that photo was taken. The investigation later revealed that no woman named Ashley had ever lived in that house. The photos on her profile were stolen from another woman's old social media account, and the identity of the person messaging me was never uncovered. The police tested my phone logs and found that the messages came from an untraceable internet-based number. I never found out why that person lured me to that house. Was it a robbery, an abduction, or something far worse? I don't know. Since that night, I have followed one non-negotiable rule for any online date. First meetings are always in a public place, in my own vehicle, on my own terms, and never, ever go into a stranger's house. Because that night, I went to meet a girl. Except there was no Ashley. There was only a stranger who knew my name, recognized my car, and was waiting for me in the dark. Friends, perhaps today's 3 stories will make you a bit more cautious about online dating. And that is a good thing, because you don't always need ghosts to feel true terror. Sometimes, all it takes is a stranger. So, if you ever date online, prioritize your safety above everything else before meeting in person. Asterisk, always meet in public places. Asterisk, let someone know your exact location. Asterisk, maintain full control over your own transportation. And if anything feels off, you owe no one an explanation. Just leave, because that uneasy gut feeling is rarely just paranoia. It might be your instinct picking up on a danger you haven't consciously realized yet. I was with you on True Horror Vault. We will meet again on another dark night. Until then, stay safe. And remember, you can never be completely sure who is waiting on the other side of the screen.